There are a lot of questions in this universe that we'll probably never know the answers to. What is the meaning of life? What happens if I burp, hiccup, and fart all at the same time? If a tree falls in the woods and there's nobody to hear it, does it make a sound? But the one I think I can answer for all of you in this video is what's the deal with the red label games on the Atari 2600? What is it that bonds this eclectic collection of games together? What does the color of the labels in the boxes signify? And how many of these red box games are there? All this and more will be revealed in the upcoming minutes. So sit back, relax, and let me unravel one of Atari's biggest mysteries for you. Okay, seriously, there is a reason behind the red or maroon labels and boxes for these Atari games. Unfortunately, it's nothing crazy or interesting as to why they all share the similar design. The red box or red label games, depending if you're a complete in box or card only kind of person, really just signifies that the games were sold during the end of the 2600's life. More specifically, that they were sold during the Tramiel era, when Atari had become Atari Corp and was offering the Atari 2600 Junior to the world. Atari 7800 games were almost always housed in a sort of silver or maybe gray type of box, and the labels on the cartridges followed the same design. So the red boxes and labels would help you to identify which games were 2600 games and which games were Pro System games. And this was important as there was a good number of games that was shared between both the systems. These games include the 3 Nintendo titles like Donkey Kong, Donkey Kong Jr., and Mario Brothers. It also includes stuff like Real Sports Baseball, Asteroid, Centipede, Dark Chambers, and Desert Falcon. Think about it. If your parents or even grandparents went to the store to get you that new Atari game you wanted, how upset would you be if they got the wrong one? If you had a 7800 and accidentally got the 2600 game, then you could at least play it still. But if you had the 2600 Junior, then you would be stuck with a game that you couldn't run at all, and your only option would be to return it. So the red boxes help to differentiate between the two consoles, to try and alleviate any confusion that might have arisen. Makes sense, right? But you might ask yourself, why red? And, well, I don't have an answer for you. My thought is that it's about as different from the 7800 boxes and labels as you could get, while still being aesthetically pleasing. You might also think that there's nothing really holding this collection of games together outside of the box and the labels. That is to say, they had little in common outside of the color choice. But you'd only be partially right. You see, most Red Label 2600 games fall into one of 3 categories. The majority of them seem to be re-releases of existing software that sold well back in Atari's history, and software they still retained the rights to. This includes things like Space Invaders, Donkey Kong Jr., Mousetrap, Yours Revenge, and even games like Millipede and Asteroids in the PAL territories. There are quite a few of these games that were only released in the PAL territories under the red label and vice versa. Atari Age has a nice list of which games are available where, should you be interested in that sort of thing. Another category of Redbox games that share some overlap with the classics are the 2600 versions of 7800 releases. And again, Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr. fall into this category, but you will also find games like Centipede, Crossbow, Dark Chambers, Ikari Warriors, and Xenophobe. We already spoke about how the color and design choice helped to differentiate between the 7800 versions, so we won't get into that again. But it helped to ensure that 2600 Junior owners would still have the ability to play some of the newest and best stuff from Atari's beefier console. In theory, anyway. To me, these versions just felt like wasted resources in most cases. They were lesser versions of pretty good games that were already available elsewhere. From Atari, no less. Dark Chambers would be an exception, however, as I enjoy both versions and find them different enough to enjoy them on their own merits. But that's the exception. I still feel that making 2 ports of these games really wasted time and it could have been better spent elsewhere. Like in the third and final category of Redbox games, for example, because the last collection of games using red labels were all new and exclusive to the 2600, and some of these are the most impressive games ever to hit the console. We're talking about stuff like Solaris, Radar Lock, Secret Quest, and the port of Roadrunner. They were all incredibly fun and did things on the console that I think most people had thought impossible. Action-packed aerial combat in Radar Lock, similar to games like Afterburner, and a long, expansive adventure that required passwords and secret quests, just to name two. And while the 2600 had become long in the tooth and well past its prime during the late 80s, these games still gave 2600 owners and Atari fans in general something to enjoy during the time. So again, the red boxes and labels were to help them stand out from other products and break any confusion about which console they were for. And they fell into three categories, which were brand new games made just for the 2600, lesser ports of 7800 stuff, and classics that Atari had thought would sell well. So I guess the only thing left to answer in this video is, how many of these babies were released? And by my count, using the list from Atari Age that I had mentioned earlier, there was 43 in all. Not too bad, most people would think. But when I break it down, you'll realize that those really aren't great numbers, and grabbing a full collection usually isn't too attractive for a few reasons. First off, these releases were split across the Atari Corp era, and that era lasted from 1985 to roughly 1992, so 43 games over 7-ish years isn't really that great. But it gets worse, as not all of these games were available in all regions. In the United States, we got about 29 of those games. Most of them were falling into the new games and the ports of 7800 games categories. A lot of the re-release classics stayed in PAL for some reason. That includes classics like Millipede, Asteroids, Pole Position, Moon Patrol, Jungle Hunt, Joust, and so many more that did not get the red label treatment in North America. And I really don't know why, because the red box versions of those games would have been amazing for somebody like me. But maybe these re-releases weren't doing so well over here. Who knows? But if you want to collect red box or red label games, then you'll want to decide if you're going for a complete NTSC set or the complete collection. And it's really a personal thing, as almost all of them are affordable no matter what the region is. There's one last thing I want to address about the Atari Red Label games before we part ways, and that's all the Coleco stuff. Some of you have no doubt already left a comment, or you were planning on mentioning that the Redbox versions of Venture, Mousetrap, and yes, Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr. were all originally developed by Coleco, and Atari had acquired the rights to re-release them and distribute them after Tramiel had acquired the company. But how, you might ask? Well, it's all thanks to who had which rights and how Coleco overstepped their boundaries and lost it all. Famously, Coleco had the console rights to games like Donkey Kong, and they even used that as the pack-in with their console. Atari had to settle for the computer rights to those games, but when Coleco released the Atom computer, they made all of their ColecoVision software backwards compatible with it. So Atari sued over this and won, giving them the rights to those games on consoles as well. And it seems that Coleco passed on some other stuff to them after the famous video game crash. So, Atari was well within their rights to re-release those versions after winning the lawsuit and acquiring them from Coleco. Not even Nintendo could stop their characters from appearing on the 2600 and the 7800, even during the time of the NES. But, really, they were so far ahead in the market that it didn't hurt them at all. Well, it might have wounded Nintendo's pride, but I'm sure their wounds healed nicely by becoming the biggest video game company ever, and dethroning Atari for that title almost immediately. But with that, I think we've said pretty much everything there is to say about the Atari Red Box or Red Label games. For kids like myself, these were the 2600 games that were in stores when I had my 7800. Now it's true that most of my 2600 games were hand-me-downs from my parents, as well as aunts and uncles, but I did have a few Red Box titles, and even then I thought the labels were cool and different. I liked how they were uniform with one another, whereas the rest of the hand-me-down stuff was all different designs and the cartridges were even different shapes. But hey, I was a weird kid, what can I say? But with all that, I want to start hearing from you guys. What do you think about the red boxes and the red labels that Atari Corp 2600 games had? Do you like them, or do you prefer the previous era stuff and designs? And is there any information about these red box games that I missed? If so, then leave that, the answers to the other questions, and anything else you want to say in the comments down below. And please, leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe if you want to see more just like it. I do videos just like this one every Thursday, and we cover the whole gauntlet of Atari consoles, from the 2600 all the way to the new VCS. We also do a review every Sunday, and the Atari Network podcast every other Friday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 4:30 Pacific. As a matter of fact, the next one is tomorrow night. So join myself and co-host Vinny Vineyard for the Atari Network podcast on Friday nights at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Also, please consider joining my Patreon. The following people already have, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. Their support means the world to me and helps the channel to obtain better equipment, acquire items to cover, and keep things growing around here. It's $5 a month and you get access to members-only live streams and videos. Okay guys, I'm the 7800 Pro Gamer, and I want to thank you all for listening to me talk about 2600 Red Box stuff in the video. And remember to stay classy, Atarians.